Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Fitness Education Series produced by the Australian Fitness Academy. It's like progressive overload for your brain. I'm your host, Tom Rock, and today's episode I'm going to talk about the National Health Guidelines. And I think it's a good one to start with. It's a good one potentially to educate your clients on, but also to think about your own physical activity in terms of do you meet the recommended the guidelines, the national guidelines that are recommended for health, and what you should be doing for your physical activity on a daily and weekly basis. And I think it's a good place to start in terms of educating your clients. If you do have clients that are looking to obviously improve their health and fitness, understanding what potentially guidelines they may have seen or got is good to know. It's also important to know what information is out there that the clients could be accessing. That's generally, government recommended rather than things they're seeing on Instagram or Facebook or social media to guide their thoughts on what they should be completing. The National Health Guidelines, I'll put the link in the site, but it's health.gov.au. That's the website that I found these national guidelines on. So you can find that in the link in the show description. But have a read, have a look at it, see what you think about them. It's a good starting point. So in terms of, I think it's good in terms of it gives people a general understanding of what they should be doing, but it is quite broad and not necessarily specific. So basically, we'll talk about the adult guidelines today, but the adults should be active on most days, preferably each day of the week. And it says they should do either 2.5 to 5 hours of moderate intensity physical activity, or they should do 1.25 to 2.5 hours of vigorous physical activity for the week. So you either got to do 150 minutes to 300 minutes of moderate physical activity throughout the week, or you sort of look to do the vigorous activity, 75 to 150 minutes of vigorous physical activity, or equivalent to that throughout each week, or a combination of both. And that's basically the guidelines. And then it does have some muscle strengthening activities as part of your daily physical activity. Generally, at least 2 days of the week, you should be doing some sort of muscle strengthening activity. It lists things like push-ups, pull-ups, squats, lunges, lifting weights. It does also mention household tasks that involve lifting, carrying, or digging could potentially count towards that physical activity as well. And that's basically your guidelines for doing your weekly fitness activity. And it sort of states that the benefits of doing regular physical activity are going to be things such as reducing risk of getting type 2 diabetes or cardiovascular disease, or managing these things, reducing blood pressure, reduced risk of some cancers, prevent unhealthy weight gain, maintaining strong bones and muscles, all these sort of things. So that's the broad guidelines it gives. There's further information and a bit of a fact sheet that talks a little bit about if you haven't done a lot of physical activity, make sure you start gently and then slowly build up to these recommended guidelines. Potentially, if you're unsure, consult a health professional if you need more advice, I guess, or if you're not sure where to start. It gives some examples of like vigorous activities where you need to be either breathing harder, jogging, but it will depend on your fitness levels. And it also looks at, or just briefly discusses the potentially long periods of sitting may have a negative effect even for those who meet the guidelines. So if you sit down all day, if you meet the guidelines but you're generally sitting all day, that may also be a bad thing. So it talks about a bit about reducing sedentary activity or limiting times sitting down and sort of breaking that up a bit. But I think it's interesting to talk about the guidelines in general, and they're potentially there to give people an idea of what they should be doing each week. But they don't really give a specific guide, and that's why personal trainers or fitness instructors can be really useful, because they can help put these ideas. So if I have to do 5 hours of moderate intensity physical activity each week, or 2.5 to 5 hours, what does that actually mean? I need to go for a brisk walk. How do I break that up? Do I do half an hour a day? Do I do an hour every second day? What's best? And it's going to depend on different circumstances. different individuals will fit it in differently. Um, Obviously, we would probably look at not just doing, you can't just do 5 hours on a Monday and some vigorous activity and then you do nothing for the rest of the week. That's probably not going to be the best result either. As I said, the guidelines do state that preferably adults should be active on most days, preferably every day. So that's something you'd want to encourage clients to do if they're coming to you looking to get fit or be healthier. Obviously, we're trying to teach them these habits so that they can start to input on each day. So they'll obviously hopefully come to the gym with you, and that'll definitely get their muscle strengthening activities, start to build some muscle mass and improve their bone mineral density potentially to make them stronger and healthier. But outside of that hour or 30 minutes, 45 minutes or an hour with you, it's on the other days of the week that they're going to still have to try and meet these guidelines potentially to help improve their health or maintain their health. And these guidelines can be a good goal. I think for a lot of people, after they have been training for a while, or if they've built up to these guidelines, potentially they're too little, and you've got to sort of structure things to go further than this sort of base level of this is the base of what you need to do to be healthy. But obviously, you can sort of optimize your health and your performance by maybe doing more vigorous activity or more longer runs or more cardiovascular activity or prioritize your strength training potentially for different people. I think it also, in terms of the physical activity guidelines, it's no matter how much you implement that, if you're not implementing any, or your client's not implementing any nutritional guidelines, or they're not following the basic Australian Eat for Healthy guidelines and getting good nutrition, then that's going to offset potentially all the work they're doing for their physical activity and trying to get healthy with their physical activity. If they're not getting the nutrients in, or they're eating a poor diet, that's not going to be good for their health in the long run either, and they're probably still going to have potentially increased risk of type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, or health problems based off their nutrition. So when they come to the gym, if you're meeting them as a client or they're looking to get healthier, these are things you want to start to educate them on. It's a lot to build on initially, but giving them tips on how to get this in or how to get that physical activity in on days where they're not in the gym is really good. And the idea that these guidelines sort of give in terms of brisk walking, it could be going for a hit of golf, mowing the lawn would count, swimming, find an activity that they like, and that's probably a good thing to educate them, is that they can do anything as long as it's active. It lists things like jogging, aerobics, cycling. It lists soccer and netball as well. So sports are a really good option potentially if your client is looking to do something a little bit more, I guess they might find more fun than just going for a walk or a jog or a bike ride or whatever it is. Socially, sports can be really good. So it ticks some physical activity off, yes, but it's also a really good social activity, and they might sort of get that activity in a fun way where it doesn't feel like they're just doing it for the sake of doing physical activity. It's more of a fun activity they get to do, and it ticks off some of that incidental exercise or that physical activity that they should be doing on most or every day of the week if they can. So I think it's a good thing to know the guidelines, see where they're at, but also know how much sort of they leave to the responsibility of the individual reading them to interpret them and work out how to get that in regularly into their week. And again, it's good that the guidelines, if they're too specific, people will avoid doing it because they feel like they can't do it exactly. If it's specified to go for a 30-minute walk every single day of the week, people are going to sort of potentially be too busy, not be able to fit it in, and then they're just going to sort of realize that or feel like they can't do it. But it's important potentially for you to help educate clients on what they need to do to improve their health, and this is can be a good starting point to say if you're looking to improve your physical health, this is a good thing to potentially build up to. And once we can build up to this and we maintain this, that's going to go a long way in terms of reducing risk factors and things like that. I think the cardiovascular side of the training is a really interesting one. These days, gyms are getting bigger and bigger. A lot of people are resistance training, which is really good. Getting into the hypertrophy and lifting weights is really cool. Cardiovascularly, I think there's a lot less, I guess, programming, and it's probably not as big on social media and things like that as the cardiovascular side of things. So there's probably a lot of people out there that are meeting the strength training guidelines, but not necessarily maybe meeting the cardiovascular guidelines or the activity guidelines in terms of moderate and vigorous cardiovascular activity. So I think regular cardiovascular activity is a place for a lot of people to improve. And it's good because they'll see, if they haven't done a lot of cardio before, they'll see a lot of results. And even if you are going to the gym regularly and doing a lot of strength training, if you're not doing any cardiovascular training around that, you could see a lot of benefits in terms of maintaining body fat levels, still reduces the risk of cardiovascular disease, and improving blood pressure and cholesterol and things like that. You get a lot of good benefits from that cardiovascular activity. So I think that's a good thing to think about, is if you do have a client that loves the gym, what are they doing in terms of cardiovascular training to improve their cardiovascular health? Because that's just as important in terms of reducing ongoing risk as we age and as we get older. Cardiovascular health is really important. So yeah, hopefully that gives you a bit to go off. What I might do next week, we might look at cardiovascular training a bit more. I might discuss some differences in terms of high intensity interval training, as well as sort of long, slow distance training. So what the difference is one better than the worst? Should I be doing intervals, high intensity intervals? Should I just be going for long, slow, sort of steady state runs? Is one better than the other? So that sort of whole cardiovascular side of things is something I might discuss a little bit more next week. So if you do have any questions about cardiovascular training, whether it's programming, different forms of cardiovascular training, intervals, interval length, session design, anything cardiovascular training wise, if you're doing it, if you're not doing it, what do you enjoy about it? Do you find it harder to motivate yourself to do compared to resistance training? Any thoughts on cardiovascular training or anything you want to know, or you want to hear me discuss, send an email to tom@afa.com.au, and I'll look to cover, do a good episode on cardiovascular training. Generally, I'll start with sort of the high intensity training versus long, slow distance, and then sort of happy to cover off any cardiovascular ideas after that. So yeah, a big cardiovascular podcast will come next week, guys. But hope you got a bit out of that one, just in terms of the general guidelines that are out there for everyday Australians. And yeah, good to have a read. See what you think compared to, I guess, what you know and what you're learning in your Cert 3 and 4, or have learned in your Cert 3 and 4. Do you think it relates well to the guidelines? Do you think the guidelines are specific enough? How do you see it? Yeah, it's good. Do you think they're helpful? Like in terms of giving someone who has no knowledge, are they going to help them be fitter? All these sorts of things. But I think it's useful to see that we as personal trainers or fitness instructors do have a big role to play in helping these people interpret the guidelines and then implement them effectively, or even sort of start from scratch and slowly, progressively overload it and build them up. And that, guys, if you've got any other topics, anything you want to hear me discuss, email tom@afa.com.au. Have a great weekend, guys. I'll talk to you all soon.